Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Torkil Faero is a Norwegian general practitioner, an emergency physician, documentary filmmaker, author, and photographer. Over a 25-year career as a freelance doctor, he has worked all over Norway, had tens of thousands of consultations, and gained a unique picture of the diseases that plague us. He has learned that the cause is most often found in the stresses that our lifestyles place on our bodies. He has written 2 books, including the recent The Pulse Cure, Balance Stress, Optimize Health, and Live Longer, which was just released in the United States after spending almost a year and a half at the top of the book charts in Norway. The key of the Pulse Cure lies in measuring your heart rate variability, which indicates what is happening in your autonomic nervous system. Tuning into your heart rate variability, or HRV for short, can show you how your personal constitution reacts to specific stressors and help you tailor what you need to do to recharge. Whether you're healthy but want to make a proactive approach to your health, or exhausted and want your energy back, Dr. Faero's clear, upbeat guidance will help you to get healthy using accessible data thanks to many of our smart devices. Dr. Torkil Faero, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you, Casey. Very nice to be here.
It's very nice to have you on the show. Question number 1 is, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, I didn't react to it, so it must have been good. Yeah.
You're very good. You forgive my ignorance, but here in the United States, we're not used to the zeros that have a line through them, and the A and the E are both kind of combined together. Yeah. So did the best I could. I hope it was okay.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
In the introduction, we mentioned that you've written 2 books. I want to just briefly ask you about the first book that you wrote, all about photography. Can you tell us about that first book? I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was called The Camera Cure. It's a book on how to approach a problem, how to grab opportunities, because the same way that you would use lifestyle strategies for a better life, the same strategies you can use to take a picture. Because I've been teaching photography for like 12, 15 years. I'm doing workshops, all over the world. And I saw that, if you approach these opportunities and problems with photography, you can learn how to transfer this into real life. So it's kind of 55 different photographic tasks, that it could be about patience, about luck, about being calm, and so many things that you can transfer into real life.
Yeah.
So and that has also actually been a bestseller in Norway, but the Pulse Cure was kind of overshadowing all that, and the Camera Cure was a bit killed by COVID because it was released just 4 months before COVID hit, so everything stopped, So, but it still did very well, and and that is also my entrance into the heart rate variability, because I could see that doing photography is an activating mode of your nervous system. So I got interested because in med school we had only heard about the autonomic nervous system as fight, flight, and freeze. And when I started monitoring my heart rate variability, I could clearly see that going hunting for a picture is clearly a sympathetic drive, and a stressor on the system. Where I used to think it as it's not fight, flight, and freeze, it must be in the parasympathetic mode, in the rest and digest mode. So I got a lot of surprises when I started tracking my HRV, and it was the camera, the photography that led me to it in some fashion.
Yeah, that's very interesting. In high school, I got my first camera and kind of taught myself how to change the apertures and all the stuff I'm not very good at anymore. Now we all have iPhones. It sounds like a lot of the principles in your first book would help anybody, just, someone like me who's an amateur photographer taking pictures of sunrises and sunsets using my iPhone. It still sounds like a lot of the same principles would apply.
Yeah, and the most important is to be present, because I could clearly see teaching workshops that if you were not present in the moment, that your pictures would not be good. So you have to be present and patient and push the button at the right moment. So you have to, and then after you have taken the picture, you have to evaluate, how did this work? Was I good at this, or should I do more of this, or should I do it differently? So this evaluation of what you have done, and then to change what you're doing into something better, it's you can use it for everything in life.
I love that. Yeah, that sounds like a direct application for what we're going to be talking about today, which is your recent book and something that I absolutely love talking about. When I was 18 years old, my parents gave me a TV VCR combo to take to my dorm in college, and I returned it to buy a polar heart rate monitor because I was so fascinated with tracking heart rate, and it was helping with my cycling training that I was doing competitively at the time. I spent most of my career working on a metabolic cart where we were measuring heart rate, VO2 max, metabolic rates, fat oxidation, all kinds of stuff like that. And as part of that, we got into using technology to measure heart rate variability in various different ways over the time. There were certain forms of heart rate variability that the old Polar watches would do back in like 2006, 2007. There's different apps that you can buy now, and certainly lots of different heart rate monitors. And now we live in this really cool time where, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to measure heart rate variability, you needed very sophisticated and very expensive equipment to measure it. And now this is something that is included in a lot of the devices and wearables that we have today. It's quite an interesting evolution in how we're using heart rate variability today.
Yeah, and in Norway, at least 70% of the population, they have the smartwatches, so they already have the equipment, and they don't really know how to get the most out of it. Even the doctors don't know. When I talk about heart rate variability, and I did not know about heart rate variability until 5 years ago, so I can't blame them. It's not something we were taught in med school. But it's such an important metric, and that we all have access to it in a cheap way, using artificial intelligence, to interpret the numbers that you would have to interpret yourself, back in the day. Now the artificial intelligence does it for you, and give you an estimate of how much resources do you have this day. Are you overstraining yourself, or could you do a workout, and so on. So it's just for us doctors, it's just a magnificent tool, and that the patients, and hopefully people before they get patients can use it. I watched recently a podcast on Whoop podcast about Cristiano Ronaldo, the soccer player. If you're familiar with him, yeah, he says it's like having a doctor on his wrist. And I agree to that. So you have like a 24/7 doctor that can tell you the state of your physiology, of your autonomic nervous system. And of all the metrics that I know as a doctor, then heart rate variability may be the most important. And it's also a biometric that tells you your risk of getting a disease, and it makes it possible for you to adjust that and to regulate your system so that you get a better HRV and a less chance of contracting all the diseases that you do not want over time. And it also gives you more well-being in the moment as well.
Yeah.
So
I love it. Excellent. Before we deep dive into HRV, we host a lot of doctors on our podcast that talk about lifestyle changes, and a lot of the doctors that we chat with have become really disillusioned with the way the system works, and they somewhat get sick of just treating sick people with pills rather than trying to get on the leading edge of that and try to make people healthier. And I know you've had a similar experience. I would imagine in Norway, you probably have a far healthier population than we have around here in the United States. We seem to be really leading the charge in diseases and all kinds of poor health. I would just love to hear your own personal story and how you found being a doctor and what you've learned about, treating sick people versus trying to help keep people healthy from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of my favorite subjects, and we're catching up with you in the States. I must unfortunately say
Sorry
that,
about that.
because the people I see in my daily job as a doctor, they're like metabolic wrecks, and it's a bit sad to see, and particularly when that they could avoid getting all these diseases that they come from. But and what is the problem with the education in the medical school is that we only care about diseases, so we can identify disease and find the mechanism and find the treatment, whether surgical or with the medicines. We did not know or learn how to create health. So repairing disease was the subject, and not creating health, which is like two different things. And we did not learn anything about exercise, anything about sleep, very little about diet, and particularly about what we now know about diet, with microbiome and ultra-processed food and those kind of things. and also not about the power of rest, which is so important, to get downtime. And that is also interesting about the technology now, because the technology stresses us and has gotten us into this trouble that we have, partly because of that. But they can also take us out of it by being such a measure of our stress level, so we can regulate it if we want to. So I'm a bit sad to be working in Norway. 97% of the budget goes to treating diseases, and 3% goes to preventative medicine, and that has to change. It's not sustainable over time. So and it's also now that we know how much healthier you can be, it's a kind of ethically not right, to not tell the patients that you can reverse your diabetes, you can reverse a lot of your autoimmune diseases, and there's so much you can do, and not just sit here and passively take a pill that is not really going to fix your problem.
Yeah. Do you recall like a specific moment in your career where that kind of occurred to you, or was it something more kind of gradual that it occurred to you that like, wow, we really should be doing more prevention versus just treating people when they get sick?
The change more or less came in my life, because I used to believe, what we learned. So I did not care so much about keeping my own health in order. So I weighed 40 pounds more than I do today. I did not exercise. I was working nighttime as a doctor, totally jet lagged from week to week, and not good at stress management and diet and anything. Yeah, I was drinking, 2 glasses of wine every day. That was recommended, 10 years ago, incredibly enough. So I was in a quite poor shape, I would say, at least not mentally, because I had a blast of a life. I was sailing around the world, doing photography, all kinds of adventurous things. But my physical appearance was when I show pictures at my lectures, people start laughing. I'm not recognizable, to myself, and how I was then 10 years ago. But then my father died, and then I started at 73. And then I started reorienting myself, to find out, I don't want that. I want to live till I'm 90, or preferably 100, and still be going strong. I know that you can do that because I have patients, in that category. So, and I know what they do. So I just turned everything around and got to read books again, because after medical school, you just shun books. You have read such a load of books that you don't want to ever open a book again. And then I started opening the new books, that told me all about everything that you probably knew before me, about nutrition, sleep, diet, exercise, everything that is in the Pulse Cure, in the book. The Pulse Cure is really, although it's connected to how to use the wearables, it's really a collection of the best lifestyle strategies to live longer and better and healthier, and more well-being and energy in the moment, which because that's the same thing. And it's visible in your heart rate, luckily, incredibly enough.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can I ask you about your father? Did he pass away of like chronic disease as you're looking back?
Yeah, that a kind of cancer that is related to lifestyle. Now, when we used to think that cancer, that's just either genetic or bad luck. And it's only recently, and probably most doctors even don't know now, that most cancers are related to, insulin resistance and stress and poor metabolic rate, poor mitochondria, and they are preventable. He had a quite normal lifestyle, but not exercising, and well, he he could have done better, but we didn't know that, he lived a normal life, but I decided to, see how can I increase my chances of living longer. You never know. You could get all kinds of disease, of course, but the risk will be less when I do the right things. And it's so much easier to do the right things when you can see on your watches or on your rings that you get the results. Immediately you will see. If you have done something that is not really smart. Like eating crisps or a late night pizza or 3 beers or whatever, you will see it in your heart rate and on your monitor. So it's kind of motivating to get the immediate result instead of waiting, 30 years to see the disease you may or may not get.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I think of something like this, like HRV, is very similar to being like a speedometer on my car. The speedometer on my car doesn't tell me what I need to do, how I need to change my behavior or my speed. The speedometer doesn't know whether I'm driving through my neighborhood or driving on the freeway. It doesn't know whether it's rush hour traffic or whether it's 2 a.m. It's just telling me something. And what you said there is in the book, there's lots of things that we talk about as far as sleep and recovery and how you manage your exercise and alcohol and all these different things. The HRV itself is just a piece of information that can then drive better decisions. And if you look at it that way, it's like, okay, this is the piece of data. Now, what are we going to do with this data? We can use that to help drive better decisions. And that itself, again, it's like the speedometer and giving you the context of like, wow, I'm going 60 miles an hour down my residential street. Like, that's not a great idea. I don't want to clobber a kiddo or something. Like, you can change your behaviors around it based on that data.
Yeah, exactly. And the HRV is like the physiological speed. So you kind of see your physiological speed in the moment on these, at least some of the variables will it's a different quality, but particularly the Garmin watches and probably other devices as well will give you the speed in the moment. I can always take one look at my watch and see that my stress level is right now 36 from 0 to 100. And depending on what I'm doing, I'll often guess what the stress level will be before I take a look at the watch, and then I see my physiological speed, and then as you say that we can't drive at full speed all the time. We are not built for that. We are not machines. We are so much surrounded by machines that we start thinking about ourselves as machines, that we can go on the whole day and pushing ourselves. But we can't do that, so we have to actually stop and put our physiological speed to the minimum for large parts of the day. And what you start discovering when you track your HRV is that a lot of the stress comes from surprising sources. It's not necessarily the mental stress. It may be, altitude. If you're in Utah, go up to the mountains. That will affect it a lot. Alcohol, a late night meal, the menstrual cycle for women can be a really tough one. And often I see that a lot of diseases will reduce your HRV for a lot longer than I used to think as a doctor. And after surgery and a lot of surgical procedures, we can see that the HRV is down for a long, long time. And that makes it easier for doctors to tell when can you go back to work and so on.
Yeah. Well, I had a client who was using HRV to manage his cycle training program, and he had to travel quite a bit for his job. And sure enough, every day after he would fly, any length, a flight would really affect his HRV, and it affected his training program. We had to kind of plan around that. And so it's interesting to find out that there are so many different, stressors out there. And let's definitely get into that and talk about that. But first, for the person that does not know what HRV is, can you explain what heart rate variability means?
Yeah, that person has probably been waiting for a long time now to
That's okay.
to find out what are these guys talking about. That's good. Keep the suspense.
Exactly.
The heart rate variability is the variation between heartbeats. So when you are in the restful state, the state where your body can recuperate and recover, and all the cells can get back and do their recovering stuff. Then when you breathe in, the heart rate will go up a little bit because the lungs are filled with oxygen. And then when you breathe out and there's less oxygen in the lungs, then the heart rate will slow down a little bit to save some power, and that is detectable in milliseconds. But you can detect it yourself if you are in that restful state and feel your pulse, at your neck. You can feel it. And of course, the ancient Greek and Egyptian doctors and Chinese doctors, they knew this, that the pulse could tell a lot about the health of the state. So that is in the relaxed state that we are supposed to be in most of the day from ancient times. But then if you're in a stressful state, for whatever reason, if it's mental or what you have been eating or exercise or whatever, then the heart will beat very, very steadily like a clock. And then the wearables can detect the difference between the totally relaxed state with a good variation between heartbeats and the stressful state with a low variation between heartbeats. And then it can do that in the moment, and then of course accumulate it throughout the day and night. And then you will get a very, very important overview of how your physiology is at the moment.
Yeah, very well explained. I think people think that when their heart rate is 60 and they're resting, that it's like a metronome and click, click, click. There's one beat every second, when really it will go up to 62, 63, and then come back down to 57, 58. And in that lower, like you said, the parasympathetic state, when you're more relaxed, the heart rate will generally be lower and there will be more variation in the heart rate. Where if you're in the more sympathetic or stress state, your heart rate will be higher, but it will be more steady. And that kind of difference can show you, exactly what state is more predominant in your body at that time. Is that right?
That's right. And I used to start using, for the first couple of years, I had one ECG monitor that I was, gluing, to my chest. And that could show very accurately, and that could say exactly what you're saying. So when I was breathing in, it could be the pulse went up to like 75, and breathing out, maybe down to 50, and up again to 75. And I could see it, in real time, this difference. It's called arrhythmia, actually. We as doctors learned that this was sinus arrhythmia, like a bad rhythm, but it's a good rhythm. It's a good rhythm that shows that you have a good connection to your vagus nerve. And the importance of your vagus nerve is just kind of beginning to discover the last like 10 years, So we did not learn very much about it, except for its existence, in medical school. But now we know it's so important for gut function, for immune function, and for to help your body be in the recovery state.
Yeah, interesting. And I think a lot of people at this point are aware of how detrimental stress can be, but it's so important to say that some stress sometimes is very healthy. We need it. Like if you're in a training program, if you are trying to get stronger for a cycling event or build muscle, or you just have day-to-day things. We even think of things like, saunas and cold plunges and all of these things. Those are all stressors on the body. Anytime you eat is a stress on the body. It's just that we just don't want it to be overly stressed all the time and not relaxed enough more of the time. Like there's a balance there that we need to kind of understand. Too much for too long is not great, and too little for too long is also not great. It's the balance between the two that is most important.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, exactly. And the big problem is that we don't shut totally off. It's like you're having the oven on it could go for like 0 to 6, and you never turn completely off. So you're like simmering on 1 or 2 all the time, and we're not made for that. So that leads to a state of chronic stress. So we are made to grow from acute stress. We are made to do hard things and to recover stronger from that, both mentally and physically. But we're not equipped to deal with this chronic low-grade stress that day and night over a long, long time that we are now living in. And all the toxic sources that we have, so we have to live a little bit more like our ancestors did on the savannah. Really, when we work against our biology, we lose, and that's so important. We have to sleep better. We have to get more sunlight. We have to rest more. We have to exercise more in the right amount. And these things are all important. So, and it's interesting you mentioning cold plunges, and the cold actually is a big stressor as you're in the really cold water. But once you get out of it, you will see on your watch that you can be in a parasympathetic state for hours afterwards. You feel calmer. You probably have you done cold plunges?
I have, yeah, as unpleasant as they are in the short term.
Yeah, unpleasant in the short term, but pleasant for hours afterwards. And you can see it on your watches. So you will see that you reach this parasympathetic state with a better HRV. So the sensation you have after the cold plunge is measurable. And that, of course, I used to hate, that my wife filmed from outside the door when I was in my first cold shower. I was just screaming, and it's still uncomfortable. But when you know that afterwards you will see the result, and you will be calmer in a meeting or at the lecture or whatever you need to perform, then it's worth it. So as you're in the shower, you already know the benefits that comes afterwards. And the opposite, when you're having that 2 glasses of wine, you know that there will be a price to be paid in the night, and it doesn't taste that good anymore.
That's right.
So that is a big surprise for so many people. The effect of alcohol that is so big on the system, because the alcohol, makes you feel relaxed and calm. That's why so many people use it as self-medication. But then during the night, the alcohol has to be changed into acetaldehyde, which is very toxic, and the body is struggling, and the liver is struggling very hard to get rid of it. And it's a big stressor. I can see on my watch that it's as big a stressor as holding a lecture in daytime.
Wow.
In the night after maybe 3 or 4 glasses of wine. So
wow.
I do it sometimes just to experiment, but then I have to know that in the next 2 or 3 days, I'm not going to do anything very important.
Wow.
Because
it's that big of a difference.
Yeah. And according to Whoop, I also use a Whoop band, and they take in the knowledge from their users, and they can measure that it takes 5 days until you're back again where you started, before you had a night out of like 4 or 5 glasses of beer or bottles of beer and so on.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I generally follow a very low carbohydrate type diet, but I'm one that, enjoys an IPA every now and again. And this has got me very much rethinking that habit and making me think like, wow, maybe this is affecting me a lot more than I thought it was.
Yeah, it could. And also it could not, because all these biometrics will be very individual. So I go together with people that can drink 1 or 2 glasses of beer or bottles of beer, and it's no problem. But my recovery is wrecked. So you can see how you react to certain things, because in medical research, we are watching how an average will respond to a certain whatever we are investigating, and that does not necessarily mean anything to you, because you could be at the opposite side of the spectrum. And this will show how do you react to gluten, how do you react to a training session, because that can be so different.
Yep.
And one of the most important things about the devices is they can guide you through training, and particularly people with a low VO2 max. When they start training, on New Year's Day or the 2nd of January or something, they cannot train hard. They will be full of lactic acid, and they have to start really slow. So and that is what these devices can guide you. How much do you need to train, according to your fitness level?
Yeah, it reminds me. It reminds me a lot of a continuous glucose monitor, where you put this device on and it shows you how you react to certain foods. And the number of stories that I've heard of, like, you would expect everybody eating white rice would have the same thing, or everybody having a banana or a potato. I've even heard some people eating certain vegetables and having a really high response in their blood glucose, where normally we would think like that's pretty benign. That's not going to affect, vegetables are not going to affect your blood sugar. For some people, it does. And so HRV is very similar in that way, that it's just showing you how you are reacting today, right now, to whatever's going on.
Yeah, because that can be very different. For example, if you go for a run, half hour, whether you have slept enough that night or not, can affect it a lot. And that will I also use a lot CGM, glucose, continuous glucose monitor. And if I have a poor night's sleep, if I eat the same meal, it will go up a lot more.
Wow.
So the sleep affects the stress level and cortisol a lot more than we probably would think.
Yeah. Okay. When I was using HRV very religiously, I was in a speed skating program, and I was training fairly frequently. And so I was using it to manage my training load for a particular day, or even long-term over the course of a month or a 3-month block. I found it to be very helpful. Now, when we were using it, I was instructed that you do it in the morning every single day. You go about 2 weeks to develop your baseline and kind of get your normal numbers, and then you do it every single day, one time in the morning on the same device, and that's kind of it. You get that one measurement. And I thought that was the best way to do it because so many things would fluctuate during the day, and that way you control the variables and get the overall sense of how you're doing. After finding your content in your book, you've really changed my mind about this, where I've seen much more of the value of always having something on and on you so that you can watch it during the day. Again, similar to checking your blood glucose under the same circumstances every day by pricking your finger at the same time in the morning versus using that continuous glucose monitor where you're seeing it all the time. So again, I really appreciate how you've approached this, and it does so in a way that democratizes this for everybody because so many people now have access to these devices that have this built in. So I like that you kind of approach it in that way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because kind of the old way of measuring it is just as you say, that you were supposed to measure it in the morning. And that was because if you measure it at some point during the day, it can be a lot more tricky because there are so many things that can affect it. So if you didn't have the algorithms and the right equipment, it would be no use to pick a certain point in the day and then just do it. So you would need to do it at the same time every day. And the problem is that it's like you only get the total on your bill. You only see the total sum of all the expenses or items that you have been doing. So what the like Garmin does is that it will show you the items on the list. It will show, okay, how much did the lunch affect you? How much did the run, your jogging run affect you? And this conversation with a friend or an enemy, how does this the quarreling with your wife or all these different variables, so then you can see it, and you would not be able to see that from just measuring in the morning. You may see that, okay, the level was low today, but you have no idea of what it was. For example, I've identified chili as a terrible destroying my recovery state. I did not know that. I've been eating chili, of course, all my life, but I never gathered from waking up in the morning feeling a bit sluggish that it was the chili I ate at 6 o'clock the day before that did that. I could not have found that out, but when I see the readouts from the watch, I see that, okay, it started at 6 o'clock. Okay, what did I do then? Oh, I was eating a bag of chili crisps or whatever. Okay, so that was the reason. So it's much more easier to identify the different items on your items on your list of what affected your heart rate variability.
Very, very
If that
interesting.
was understandable.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And we know that different companies probably all have different systems, different algorithms, different scoring systems. And to me, I would consider that less important than using whatever device you like and using that one consistently. It's almost like a body fat scale. Like, does a body fat scale actually know how much body fat you have? Like, no, we're making a really good guess. Like, you need to do an autopsy to find out how much body fat somebody has. It's probably not the best way to do it if you're curious about that number. There's proxies and we can get good ideas, but the most important thing is to use whatever you use and use it very consistently so you can notice changes over time. Is that the way you look at it as well?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And all the different devices has their pros and cons. So both the Whoop band is very good, and the Aura Ring is very good. If you have an Apple Watch, there's an app called Athletic, like the combination between athlete and analytic. That's quite good. But in my mind, at least for the moment, the Garmin watches are by far the best ones. And that is not because of the Garmin watch in itself, but they have bought the algorithms of a Finnish company called First Beat, and it's their algorithms that is really the key to identifying all the things that stresses you. So, but in this field, everything is evolving by the month. I know that Samsung is now coming out with their Galaxy Ring, and they probably have some new things coming on also. So this may be totally different in 3 months' time. And what is good for me as a doctor is that it's not only money after you get sick. because there's so much money in big pharma. It's so much money in sick people, in waiting till people get sick and then treat them with something that does not cure them, but just keep them a little bit better. And luckily here, there's a lot of money from big companies in helping you to avoid getting sick. So I'm actually quite optimistic that at least the ones who choose to use this possibility can get healthier. Of course, you have to choose it yourself, but at least there will be a device that can help you get a better lifestyle that is more sustainable over time, and makes your autonomic nervous system and immune system and physiology be sustainable. And it will not only avoid you getting all these diseases like in 20, 30 years, but it will give you more well-being and more energy in the moment also.
Yeah.
And that is the reason why the book has sold so much in Norway, that you will feel this instantly. In 1 or 2 weeks, you will feel the difference. And then people tell all their friends, because this subject was totally unknown. The Potsker is actually the world's first guidebook on how to manage lifestyle strategies compared to wearables. So when it came out, last January, it was something that nobody had heard about, but it spread so quickly because people immediately realized the value of this.
Oh, that's so cool. You must be so proud. I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about lifestyle changes, they only see the sacrifice. They only see that they should, do some time restricted eating, and that's uncomfortable at first, or they should do some workouts, and that's uncomfortable. And like all of these things are just like they're sacrifices that you have to make, but you don't realize all of these things are also paying you back as you're doing them. You will have more energy. You will feel better. You don't know what that feels like just yet. So it just feels like a sacrifice, but it's not a sacrifice when you start to see the benefits on the other side.
Yeah, and you talk about fasting, and that is also so motivating, because the first time I was fasting, I was expecting to see a lot of stress on my monitor. It felt uncomfortable. I had been eating breakfast for like 50 years, so my body and the bacteria in my intestines, they were used to having their meal at the same time. But on the watch, I could see it was in a parasympathetic mode. That fasting at that time, before I started cold plunges, was the most effective way of getting into the parasympathetic mode. So fasting is very effective in that way. And of course, in all religions, fasting is a way, to get sharper, and so it's an ancient strategy to be more focused and feel more energy. And of course, the food industry wants you to think that if you feel low on energy, you have to eat something with sugar,
That's right.
And of course, when you eat something with sugar and you have used this glucose monitor, you can see that the sugar goes high up and then crashes down. And while it's crashing down, you feel the need for another kick, from a sugary thing. And you go on a roller coaster ride with your blood sugar the whole day. And that is very, very stressful. And you will feel hungry 10 times during the day. And now, I use the restricted feeding window of 6 hours, or maybe 7 or 8 at some point, sometimes. I've never felt I almost never feel hungry.
Yeah. It's such a game changer to think that the idea that breakfast is the most important meal actually came from cereal companies. Like a lot of people wouldn't consider that. And then it starts to make perfect sense. So they're trying to sell cereal to you, your first meal of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Kellogg's. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I do have one other question about the wearables. So oftentimes when people were measuring heart rate in the past, they would need a chest strap. That's kind of how we use things. It would pair up to the device that you were using. Maybe about 10 years ago, we started to see more of the optical devices where with an armband or like the Whoop band or like the Apple Watch or Garmin, the heart rate monitor is kind of built in. And I haven't had much experience with them recently. I used to sell Garmin devices all the time, along with Fitbits and Polar watches and all these other things. I noticed that with the Garmin watch, again, this is several years ago, but they seem to have the most trouble when somebody would get their heart rate up to show them where their heart rate currently was during exercise. I assume that technology has improved since I was working with them a little bit more. Do you notice any issues with heart rate accuracy in certain situations among the different devices that you've used, or at this point, are they all pretty much very accurate?
I think they're pretty much very accurate, but I use a test strap when I go running to have it as accurate as possible. But that is also maybe not the most important time to measure the heart rate is after you have been running to see how your pulse react afterwards. How fast will you go down into a de-stressed level? But when you are gauging your speed, according to the heart rate, which is important, you for endurance athletes, you would need to have like 80% of your exercise in zone 2.
That's right.
With maybe for me, that would be a pulse, 130, 140. And then maybe 20% of your exercise, maybe in zone 4 or with a more strain on your system. So most people, they train too hard. They think that they always have to work out maximum and be really, really tired afterwards to have any worth. But we see now that when you train after your HRV and keep 80% in zone 2, you will get better, because the key is in the recovery and not in the strain. So if you just strain yourself all the time without allowing for recovery, you're just breaking down your body. So the strengthening of your body is in the recovery time.
That's right.
So you have to allow for that, and that can be hard to know. So you need these devices to be able to tell you better when you are recuperating after exercise. So exercise is bad for you. Recovery is good. Is what I've heard. People say it in that way. So I have to make sure that you get enough recovery.
Yeah. I'm so glad you went there with that. I cannot tell you how amazing it was to, again, use these metabolic carts, be validating based on what we call respiratory quotient, or the difference between the oxygen and carbon dioxide that somebody was breathing in and breathing out, to be able to determine where somebody's maximum fat burning heart rate would be. It was amazing to see how consistent it was with the MAF formula, which you cited. 180 minus your age gives you a target range of where you should spend at least 80% of your time. It also very, very, very closely correlated when I would ask the person on a scale of 1 to 10 how difficult they felt like they were working. Most commonly, you'd hit that heart rate at that kind of maximum fat oxidation when somebody was at a 5 out of 10 for difficulty while they were working out. It could be conversational. They were certainly having a light sweat, but they could continue on at that pace for very long. And I got so much pushback with all these people saying, I'm not going hard enough. I want to go harder. Like, why do I have to restrict myself? And it's like, stay down at that heart rate range for 80% of your time. Like you said, you'll get better. It will improve. Your workloads will go up. Your heart rate will stay the same, but you'll be able to run faster or cycle faster or up more incline. Like, you will be able to do more work, but you have to follow those principles and restrain yourself down to those lower heart rate ranges where people feel like they're not getting a good enough workout. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because we're not made, to work at that high heart rate over time. It's detrimental to our health. It's not healthy, that's for sure. Because it creates a lot of inflammation in the body. Because ancient, in the savannah 50,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago or a million years ago, they would never run or do anything at the 180 in heart rate. That the only time that was happening was if you're running from a lion or something. You would not run that hard. So and the body, it will create a lot of inflammation in your body if you exercise at that, and then you would need a lot of recovery, and you will feel bad, and you will perform worse. Like when I'm writing, I cannot exercise that hard, because if I exercise hard, I don't have the concentration to write my next book, and there's no need to exercise that hard either, and particularly if you're not chasing that, first place and medal in a marathon or whatever.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, I think of like my weekly hockey games that I play on the ice, and it's like, yeah, my heart rate's going to get way high, but that's only for a minute or 2 minute long shift, and then I'm sitting back down for 4 or 5 minutes before I get back out there. And I don't do that every day. That's once a week maybe that I am able to do that, and the rest of the time I try to keep everything a lot lower and recommend that for my clients. I do have one last question about the exercise side of things. How have you been able to use HRV with people that are on a specific plan. Like for example, I've got several clients that I use a website called Training Peaks, where we create plans for them to train for Ironman or marathon or some of the things you mentioned. I don't think they're the best things that everybody should be doing all the time. It's quite a bit of training. Like you said, we would have never spent 14 hours a day doing work the way that some people do Ironman. So debatable on whether that's like the healthiest thing to do. But we use, a training calendar to give them a plan. However, the plan does not respond to their work day or their work week or what they had for lunch yesterday, where HRV can. So can you talk about how we can use plans to create a structure, but also be very flexible based on the data we're getting from HRV?
Yeah, it's probably at least good, to have this 80-20, in the zone 2 and maybe zone 4 or 5. And then also to have a look at everything else that goes on in their lives. Because if one person have a stressful job and another person has a relaxing job, their training intensity should be very different. And if one person likes to eat pizza and don't tolerate gluten and get inflammation from that, it will be a different level. So they should really, and if you Google, HRV and training, you can see that the people that are training in accordance with their HRV. So if their HRV is low, it means that they have been overtraining, and then they relax a day or two until the HRV goes back up again. They perform better. But I'm not expert at the top athlete level, but I know that the top athletes they use HRV to optimize, and particularly when they are tapering in the front of a big competition, they would do that. So I know that like the winner of Tour de France, even him uses 80% of the exercise in zone 2.
Yep.
So this is not only for amateurs or whatever you call it. It's for the real top athletes.
Yep, definitely. I thought it was interesting to use it in the context of like sports teams, like a soccer team. Like if you had HRV data for all of your players, you could know if you have, 4 strikers available, but 2 of them don't have HRV scores that matter. You might know that, okay, I can play them, but I'm going to have to sub them out sooner, and that changes my whole game. And then you can also approach those players and say, okay, how can we maximize this better for our next match so that you can be more recovered so that we can use the team? I thought that application was very, very interesting. And I really appreciate your insight into the exercise piece. I think that's a really fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah. So that's important, as you say, that on a teamwork that you could see which players are in a good shape, and then can tolerate the hard match do you use cold water or cold therapy after the hockey matches, or?
I used to be a lot more consistent with it after my cycle races. Again, it was so terribly painful to sit in a cold kind of creek coming from the mountains with snow that had just melted, 5 minutes ago. But after a race, it just restores your legs feel absolutely amazing afterwards. And so now it's mostly like cold showers that I do. I wish I had a cold plunge or would go to the canyons a little bit more to sit in that water. But do you have access to a cold plunge, cold water, or do you mostly do the cold showers?
Yeah, or mostly cold showers, as is more easily accessible. And if the temperature is not very low, you can just extend the time. That will have the same effect.
Yeah,
I use that.
Yeah, great point. You mentioned something earlier, which I think is fascinating. I didn't want to miss this. Women and their menstrual cycle, I thought was fascinating. How can HRV help women understand their cycle better and plan lifestyle things around that?
But the women will, the week before menstruation, a lot of women will have a very big dip in the heart rate variability. It can be as hard as COVID when I can see it on the curves of the heart rate variability, and can then last for a week. So what they feel, that they could be feeling or having mood swings and so on. It's not just a feeling, it's a physiological strain on their bodies. And it seems that it has a lot to do with their overall stress level. So if they have a lot of stress, it will disturb the female hormones, particularly progesterone. And that is what it seems to be leading this downward dip in the heart rate variability. And once you start taking that into account and you don't stress as much or exercise as much during that time, it can level out quite a lot. So the people who have strong PMS syndromes or even PMDD, which is more a premenstrual dysphoric syndrome or dysfunction, that then they can see that in their curves, at least from the Garmin watches, and then they can start taking measures to avoid that.
Mm. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, I think that's very fascinating and a really probably underused area that more people need to know about as far as HRV goes.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's one specialty in medicine that should be paying really much attention to HRV, that is gynecologists, because it will have a lot effect on the pregnancy. It will have a lot effect on the menopause, and polycystic ovarian syndrome is related to HRV. Endometriosis is related to HRV. The fertility, infertility, or fertility, I will also depend on HRV. So, so so that is so important, when it comes to female reproduction and hormones.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And I know we've already mentioned this, but just to reiterate, since it's something we love to talk about around here, the nutrition piece of things, regardless of what somebody decides to do for their own personal diet, we can pretty much probably all agree that it's the processed and ultra processed foods. It's a lot of sugar. It's a lot of, ingredients that you can't pronounce and you don't have available to you in your own kitchen. It's the seed oils. It's things like constant eating and snacking, not doing time restriction that is probably going to cause the most disruption to HRV. Is that accurate to say based on your experience?
That's right. And the biggest source of inflammation in the body is related to diet and related to ultra processed food that we're not made to eat. Our intestines are not made to eat that, and it leads to a leaky gut. It leads to a lot of stuff that you don't want in your bloodstream because of the leaky gut leaking, substances from your intestinal contents and into your bloodstream. And it seems that ultra processed food, or at least some parts of it, will give you this inflammation, and it will be visible on your monitor. And that was the biggest surprise to me, that when I started tracking my system, that if I was eating certain things, it would be a so big stress on my body. I could, because I have the same job, when I work as a doctor before and after lunch. So if I go fasting until lunch, and then depending on what I'm eating, I can see big differences. And I remember the first time I was eating, there was probably somebody having a birthday or quitting their job or whatever. They had a big cake. So instead of the usual salad lunch, I just had two large sizes of cake. And the stress was terrible, for maybe 3 or 4 hours afterwards. And I would never have imagined, even as a doctor, that that could be a consequence. So more and more people see that the sources of their joint pains and fibromyalgia and migraine and brain fog and all of these things is very often that they're eating food that they cannot tolerate, and that could be also, it's most often gluten and milk proteins that is the culprit, but it can be other stuff that it may, if you see that there will be a big difference in the fasting state until your eating state, very often, then I would take a test for food allergies or food intolerances, is probably more better to say, because you may find out that certain foods that you should not eat.
Yeah. Excellent. Just out of curiosity, and again, this is highly individualized, but I'm just curious, besides intermittent fasting, how do you construct your own personal diet? What things do you make sure that you always include, and what things besides the processed foods and 2 slices of cake for lunch do you try to avoid?
I try to eat whole foods, and that's probably the most important. Eggs, nuts, salads, as meat that is not so much processed. Things that the people say, that things that your great grandmother would recognize as food. So if you stick to that, and avoid the ultra processed food, avoid the snacks, junk food. So that's important.
That's great.
Yeah,
Cool.
and stick to like water for to drink.
Perfect. Yeah.
Stay away from soft drinks and sugary drinks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. If you're listening and not watching, Dr. Torkil Faero is very, very fit looking. It's hard to imagine those before pictures that you were describing of yourself 40 pounds heavier. I cannot even imagine that. You look totally healthy and radiant. I'm just curious, is there anything else about the book that we've missed that we need to reiterate or talk about?
Oh, not really. I think we've been covering a lot. So it's only we have a website, a social website. It's called thepulsecure.com, where it's possible to see video lectures and webinars and a lot of information. So I have a blog there, and so if people are interested in this, then thepulsecure.com would be a good place to go to ask questions. And it's like a Facebook page where you can show your curves or ask questions and get answers. So
I've been on the website. It's a great resource. You offer a lot of things there. I really like it.
Really yeah, good. And we're building it up now. So in Norway is big. We have a Norwegian website, and this is the international website, and we're constructing it. So it will be bigger and better and with more information.
It's fantastic.
By the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I definitely need to visit Scandinavia at some point. I feel like I would fit in based on my genes and hair color and skin type and everything.
Yeah. You look Norwegian. Yeah,
I would love to. I'll start learning Norwegian language, and I can use the expanded website. But again, Doctor, this has been super, super helpful. I really appreciate all this information. One more time, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, that would be on thepulsecure.com, I think. I'm also on Instagram at Doc Torkil. I have a big Norwegian Instagram and I have a much smaller English-speaking Instagram. So, but it's just recently released in the US, so it will probably be more people there by the time.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, we'll link that in the show notes. My Instagram page just got hacked and completely taken over, and I have no more access to it. So I just created a new one. Oh. Yeah, it was not a great situation, but I've got a new one. So that will be one follow right there. I'll make sure to follow you. And we'll recommend that to all our listeners as well. We'll link that in the notes. Dr. Faero, thank you so very much for all the work that you've done in making this such an engaging and interesting topic of discussion. And I also, like we said in the interview, I really appreciate that you found a way to use the devices that we already have. So it democratizes things a lot more. People have this available. They don't need to go out and buy another device, new things. It's just using the tools that they have available, I think is really, really important and very practical. So thank you so very much for that. And thank you for taking the time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Casey. Very nice to have this conversation, particularly as you know so much about it. It was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. Thank you so very much for listening to and supporting Boundless Body Radio. This podcast is such a passion of mine, one of my favorite parts about running our business, and none of this would be possible without our incredible guests and listeners like yourself. Thank you so very much for all of the amazing reviews that we get on Apple and Spotify. Trust me, we read them all, and it means the world to hear that you are enjoying the show as well. I am very excited to announce that this summer I will be hosting a nutrition seminar series. This is actually a project that I started after I became certified as a nutrition coach. I wanted to get a group of people together to discuss all aspects of human nutrition, and as a bonus, I did the whole thing outside by a pool, which was great. After the pandemic, I stopped hosting the series, but this year I've decided to bring it back. Each week, we'll have a particular topic and an agenda. We'll have outlines that include references, and also meal plans, guest appearances, book giveaways, and more, all for free. For those of you who live in the Salt Lake City area, the seminars will be hosted every Tuesday at noon, starting on May 28th, and will run all the way until September 3rd. The seminar will be hosted outside, of course, at the beautiful Bowery Park in Daybreak, where I live. If you're available and in the area, we would absolutely love to see you there. If you are unable to attend, either that day and time does not work for you, or you don't live in the area, good news for you as well, we are going to put all the recordings and post them on YouTube, where you can submit listener questions in the comment section, which we can address in future seminars. I'm also including all of the seminar materials on our website, so you don't have to miss out on the content. My goal is to make a comprehensive yet simple understanding of nutrition so that anybody confused about how they should eat can create a framework for themselves based on their individual goals. As I said, if you're interested in participating, we'd love to have you. If you can't make it into the in-person seminar, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also our website at myboundlessbody.com/seminar to find all of the resources, videos, and a fun quiz. Either way, thank you as always for listening to Boundless Body Radio.